Good morning and welcome to Sunday Mornings with me, Wallace Chapman. Well, this morning the first legal same-sex marriage is kicked off, home lending is tightened, and will we become a nation of renters? And the tragedy in Syria, what should be our response? From 9am, the soundtrack to your life, one of the New Zealand music success stories, playing and writing music on her own terms, Anika Moa, on why she would love to be part of Fleetwood Mac. And from 10am this morning, the Labour Party, what is the future of the party and what direction should a new leader take it, and who should be that new leader? For now, though, we have, in studio together, we have Rodney. Hi, Rodney. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
How are you this morning?
Well, I'm sort of struggling with my throat, but we'll just call it husky.
Selwyn Manning, good to have you this morning. How are you?
Oh, not too bad, thanks, Wallace.
Very good indeed, surviving the thunderstorms out there.
Yeah. Certainly was going bang in the night up here in Auckland, wasn't it?
Absolutely. I guess the big issue, there's a couple of interesting ones. The GCSB bill has passed, of course, and the same-sex marriage. I want to start, though, by that epic news. David Shearer, that resignation, he's stepping down. First up, I guess, around the panel, did you see it coming? Rodney, did you see it coming?
No, not the timing. I didn't think he could last because he was so useless at it. But clearly the party had to get to a position where either they could decide on a front-runner or David Shearer had to decide he didn't have it in him.
What about you? Did you see it coming?
Yeah, we saw it coming. It's a matter of timing. If you remember right, a few weeks ago, we spoke about this, and my view was that there was a disinformation cam that had kicked off, and that's what we were reporting. It's been proved to be true. The difficulty was always nailing down when it was going to happen. We felt it was going to happen before November, when Labour would have its big conference. We thought it would be in the spring. This came a few weeks early.
Rodney, in terms of, you've got unique insight into this in terms of the anatomy of a coup, if you like. Do you see these things coming? Do you feel the wind behind you, some sort of slight gust in the caucus that says, oh my gosh, I'm going to be out?
Oh, there's no doubt that David Shearer would have felt that he was up against it. But, leaders always are, particularly opposition leaders, they're up against it. And so you always be doing it, and, speaking for myself, you're always doing a calculation, is it the best thing for the party that I stay here, or is it the best that I go? And the nature of the ego of being a politician is that you're always tempted to stay, possibly too long.
Did you, was that how yours played out? You stayed possibly a bit too long, or did you not?
No, I timed it perfectly.
Yeah.
No, I don't know. I went because I knew I couldn't win. I knew I could win the leadership vote, right? But I knew that it would be so destructive, the process, that then I would be had it. So that's what, caused me to go. I knew that, yes, I think I can hang in here, but actually I'd be hanging in by a thread. So the best thing to do is to give the party and everyone a chance. And for David Shearer, I don't know what was his thinking.
I'm just thinking because, is it again another example of a failure, picking the wrong time to go? Here we might have seen a lift out of the GCSB. There was a 5% lift in the Roy Morgan polls.
No, David Shearer couldn't do it. He actually couldn't do it.
Do you know that, though?
Yeah, yes. I think there's a potential vote that Labour is heading toward, and it can see where that potential vote is, the proportion of vote. And he wasn't able to actually get up there. Where you saw polling on the issues, National was losing ground fast on these issues. Huge polls against National's policy and GCSB, etc., etc. Labour was not able to capitalise on that, and there's a reason for that, and the leadership was not able to convince the public that that was the way it should tick.
I guess I'm asking you both, is it about the leader or is it actually about the Labour Party?
Both. But David Shearer's problem was, I think actually he's too nice a guy and he's too reasonable. And so, to be an effective leader and to be an effective Prime Minister, you've got to have a lot of ego, you've got to have a lot of punch, you've got to have a lot of certitude, you've got to be able to go on the TV and into that house and say, this is how it is, this is what's going to happen, you're no bloody good, I am, here it comes. Whereas, David Shearer's like the rest of us. He's like, oh, yeah, on balance, 50-50, that sort of thing. And it came across onto the TV. So ultimately, and that's why, someone like a David Cunliffe or a Grant Robertson, they're born politicians. You can see it in them. They've got that fire in the belly, and they're going to take it to John Key, and they're going to be the person that sees themselves as the next Prime Minister.
Phil Goff, though, wasn't that nice guy. He was very good at debating. He was very good.
Yeah, but it's a hard thing for a person coming out of, one, there was two things running there. A huge win for National in 2008. Secondly, they'd had a decade or more, under Helen Clark with strong leadership. That transition period would be a nightmare. I think with David Shearer, what happened here, it happened quite quickly in the end. The messages were getting to him from his caucus. We know that, right? And I think he went along to that town hall meeting in Auckland on Monday night where it was thousands packed out in the town hall opposing the GCSB legislation. He stood there. He did a reasonable speech, but it was Russell Norman who got a standing ovation. And David Shearer didn't get that. And I think he thought,
that's interesting.
Now, a Labour leader, you would expect to pick it up.
What was the clinchers, or do you think it were one of the clinchers were, I was thinking that when I saw the Prime Minister John Key up against John Campbell, and I thought to myself, he'd been goaded into coming on. He comes on and does a very good, in fact, I tweeted, he's on fire.
Yeah.
If I'm a leader of the opposition, I see that and I go, okay, so that's what I'm going to be debating against.
That's where the message in the caucus started to actually firm up.
Really?
Yeah, after that.
And the difficulty for the party will be this, and I mean, it's an understandable thing. They've had a very strong leader and a very successful leader ultimately in Helen Clark, and then she departs, and then they've struggled to find a leader that can lead them actually. And so that's why it's both. You actually need a leader that they can have confidence in and get behind. And that'll be the challenge for the new leader. And if they can become a leader that gets a couple of runs on the board, has a bit of success, then the caucus will unite behind them, and then that'll be a good thing. And all the differences will evaporate for that lust for power that all politicians have.
Including yourself, Rodney.
Yes. Well, you don't go on it to eat your lunch, do you?
No, that's what I remember David Longy saying the same thing. He had misgivings over the MMP system, and he said, I went into politics to get my opponents to stand on their windpipes and not let them go.
But you see, Rodney, I want to come back. This nice guy thing, you see, David Longy was one of the nicest. I mean, here he was our lawyer in Manarewa, and when our family, Dad was sick, David Longy came and said, you know what, I'll work for your family for free because you can't afford it. He was a community lawyer at heart. So how come he was so good?
Look, he was a nice guy, of course, and I think, funny enough, politicians are. The reason that they are nice guys is they have to be because they've got to get votes. And so, you're interacting with Kiwis every day in the supermarket, down the street, in the airport. So you've got to be, give that warmth. But at the same time, and Longy had it, you actually have to have a killer instinct. And when he went in with that debate with Muldoon, the famous debate, he put the knife right into his kidneys.
He nailed it.
Yeah. And you couldn't see David Shearer doing that. He'd be sort of sitting there and saying, I feel a bit sorry for poor old Rob.
Now, Labor's in a good position, I think, Wallace, in the sense now that it's got two people that are most likely going to get, one of those two, Grant Robertson or David Cunliffe, is going to get the leadership. Both of them have that mongrel in them. They're both decent people when you're actually dealing with them, but they've got that killer instinct that you need to actually be an effective opposition leader.
It is 17 minutes past 8 o'clock, and after the break, we'll continue this a little bit further and ask who should be the new leader of the Labour Party.
It's Sunday morning with Wallace Chapman.
21 minutes past 8 o'clock here. Text live to 3920, welcoming your feedback as well. Radio Live, go to the email site there. Just picking up and following on who should be the leader of the Labour Party now. There's something you said off there, Rodney, in terms of, we're going to be talking about this from 10 to 11, that true leadership is actually very, very rare, and it's very rare in New Zealand politics. There's been about 3 or 4 actual leaders.
Yes.
One of them being Helen Clark, maybe Norm Kirk. You suggested Muldoon as well.
Yes.
And you went to see him in a small town hall debate or a speech.
Yes, it was when he was leader of the opposition, and I think it would be 1974, maybe 75. And it was in my hometown of Rangiora, which was then 5,000 people, and like hundreds turned out. And I'd never seen anything like it. And I sat down, the back of the hall with my dad, and I was scared, because this guy had a power of oratory And he did that political thing of making you fear the other side, like Labour were demons and Labour were communists and Labour were wrecking the economy, and there was good people and there were bad people. It was that sort of speech. And so he demonised the Labour Party and the Labour leadership, and then he was the economic saviour. And people bought it. And I remember thinking, this guy, if he'd said, let's march down the street and set fire to the place, they would have.
Gosh.
He was that powerful as an orator. And then, in the house, he used to go back and read his old speeches, and they were astonishing. He was a huge intellectual giant. And, of course, everyone that had dealt with him at a personal level had a kind word to say about him. And he only ever hit... I'm no Muldoon, never voted National in my life, partly because of Muldoon. But, get to be fair to him, and he never hit someone unless they hit him. And I found that when I went through the Hansard. But when he hit
Unless
back...
it was Colin Moyle.
No, Colin Moyle hit him. He knew about Colin Moyle's indiscretion before the election, and Colin Moyle hit him on a point of order, accusing him of being a crooked accountant. And that's when Muldoon hit back. But Muldoon would hit back so hard that you'd actually forget the original punch.
And of course, the comparison's interesting, Selwyn, because he had that intellectual rigour and that power, and yet a young Longy came up against him and took him on. Well, so we need that right now.
This illustrates, that there are certain times and certain political cycles where you need a particular type of person to unseat an incumbent. And that was a classic case. You had Muldoon, he'd been there 3 terms, but you needed a David Longy to unseat him.
So
it was so polarising. I was an apprentice in the factories at the time, and people in the factories were tuning in while they were welding bits of steel to listen to those types of debates.
Okay, so what we need now is someone to go up against John Key, and that will be... Selwyn, who?
I think the Labour Party needs David Cunliffe, absolutely. And the reasons for that, they're in a good position. Either way, if it goes Grant Robertson to David Cunliffe, they will electrify that party and they'll electrify the Parliament. In debating time, you'll see John Key taking a different stance. They'll have to. They cannot continue with the same thing because the new leader of the Labour Party, either way it goes, is going to be formidable. The other thing is, though, I think it needs to be David Cunliffe in my view. And why I say that is Grant Robertson is very good on issues relating to, foreign affairs, politics itself. He's very beltway, as they say. Great guy, certainly can engage and enlighten an audience as well and take policy forward. But David Cunliffe is an economic thinker too. If Labour and then the opposition bloc parties are going to win 2014, they need the province's vote to swing their way. David Cunliffe, on his economic regional development kind of thinking, can do that type of thing.
And with Grant Robertson as deputy, Selwyn Manning says David Cunliffe. Rodney Hyde, what do you say?
Well, it's up to the party, obviously, but I think David Cunliffe would be the more formidable. And I think also... And I'm hoping that recent events have made him a bit more humble. And so it's probably been the making of the guy, that he got put down and then he's had to sort of bide his time on the back bench. And I think he'll be all the better for that. And so looking at it from a distance, I'd say if I was John Key, I'd rather be up against Grant Robertson than David Cunliffe.
Well, it's very interesting,
so
actually.
David Cunliffe is their best pick.
You might recall, on that backbencher show I did, 2008, we had this great little piece around the offices, and I went to your office, and the bookshelves told a lot about people. And you, Rodney, you had your Anne Rand, and you had your Nicky Hager Hollow Man, and.
You were the leak, Rodney.
And you had your sort of a lot of conservation material, a wide range. David Cunliffe, what did he have? Thatcher, Churchill, Mandela, the leaders. It was quite interesting.
John Key did a similar thing in preparation for leadership. He read, books about leaders and leadership. And so I guess that tells you a lot, doesn't it?
Moving on to another topic briefly, the same-sex marriage. Now 31 people got married on Monday. Historic. Saw it while I was at the dentist on BBC World. Your thoughts on that? Is it an auspicious start to a new era in New Zealand, Rodney? What do you think?
Look, I agree with the legislation totally, but I think it'll be a great day when we don't make a song and dance about it. And I was actually people rushing to get married and, being on TV. And I thought, look, we've done the legislation. It should be just normalised, if you like. And also, too, funnily enough, I feel sorry for my opponents because I can imagine being a conservative Christian. I'm nothing like that, right? I'm nothing like a conservative Christian, but I felt they got badly treated in the debate. And I don't think that you should shove your views that other people find offensive in their face. And I find that's what we're doing a lot of the time. It's not enough that we just actually win. We actually have to humiliate and offend the people that oppose us. And I feel that about gay marriage, actually. And I think gays should be able to get married, but not have the media sticking it in people that actually don't find it right.
Got a point there.
But the gay marriage legislation was catching up with contemporary thinking and the contemporary culture that we live in. So it was basically the law lagging behind where New Zealand was. The interesting thing is I do a radio bulletin with an Australian radio station once a week, and they were just championing this kind of thing when it was coming through. They're saying, we wish that our political representation was meeting where you guys are. So New Zealand was leading in some ways the Asia Pacific bloc in that, and we've got to, when we do that kind of thing, you've got to put your hand up and say, thank goodness, New Zealand is registering out there. The other thing, though, is I do think that all politicians have got to have a bit of mongrel in them, and this was a conscience vote. And you tweak the conscience of people to get a vote, and it's as simple as that. But celebrate it. The first off have happened, and now it's total equality.
Now it's done, and as Rodney says, normalise it. There's no such thing as a gay wedding or a same-sex wedding.
No, take the labels off.
As Grant Robertson said, look, there's no such thing as a gay car park. It's just a car park.
Exactly.
Yeah. No, and I think that's true we should be thinking that about Grant Robertson, that...
what do you think about that on the front page of Sunday Star Times?
It was shocking. It was absolutely shocking. There are guys that, have mistresses or whatever, we don't put that on the front page if they're, but to put up a guy's sexuality and make that the thing... when Grant Robertson hasn't made it his thing, there were MPs, Tim Barnett and Georgina Bayer, who sort of led the charge, and they became identified with that. But Grant Robertson's been a lot more careful.
I couldn't agree more with you. I couldn't agree more with you on that one.
It's about the person.
What on earth is the point of bringing that up?
Yes,
there's no point.
He's not campaigned on it. Yeah. He's not hidden it. And it should matter no more than if he's single, got 6 kids, got 3 kids, got no kids, married. I just don't see that as affecting the electorate. And, I hope it doesn't either.
It says more about the headline writers and et cetera, of that particular newspaper than anything else.
Okay, we're with Selwyn, Manning and Rodney Hyde this morning on the panel, The Issues of the Week. You can text us here, text live to 3920, radiolive.co.nz. Go to the Sunday Show page, and my email address is right there. I want to hear from you this morning. Now, after the news update, we have the GCS bill and the snapper row.
It's Wallace Chapman.
It is 8:36. We want to talk a little bit about Syria a little later on as well on the show, because there's some truly shocking things that are happening there now. What should the government do? But I guess the big news in the last week or so is that this very highly controversial Global Communications Security Bureau bill, the so-named spy bill, has passed, by one vote, by 2 votes?
2 votes, because the Māori Party didn't have all 3 MPs within precinct.
Gosh almighty. And of course, Peter Dunn, he hated being spied on, but voted for it anyway.
Marvellous irony in the whole thing.
What do you make, what will be the impact on Radio Live listeners out there?
Well,
nothing.
It's one of those things where some will start looking over their shoulders and wondering what's going on. It's the culture that's crept in here, the spy culture. And I think that's the most significant impact. Most people won't ever register on a radar, but they will always wonder when this type of thing is around. Remember that this is one part of the legislation that is around this. The telecommunications interception legislation is coming up in late September.
And that's the big worry, isn't it?
That's the enabler, if you like. So the GCSB bill, it maps out what the GCSB's powers would be. The telecommunications interception one in the late September that enables them to do that job.
Rodney, forget about the GCSB. Well, you've got to be really worried about this telecommunications bill. The fact that they can go into your communications and lift metadata or whatever it is, you must have real worries.
Oh, yes. No. I'll tell you what the effect will be on your radio listeners. The people that were politically motivated will move on to the next thing, because it was a big, stick to hit the government over the head with. And the 2 or 3 out there with tinfoil hats on, they will continue to be scared, and they will remain scared. This bill means absolutely nothing to New Zealand. It is actually the status quo. What was happening, with the previous legislation and what was understood to be happening with the previous legislation. Now, there is a big question mark about oversight, and I don't think anyone's argued that you shouldn't have covert ability from a government, but there is a big argument about oversight, and I certainly get that. And I've always been concerned about how do we get better oversight of our spy agencies.
Selwyn's shaking his head. Have you got your tinfoil hat on, Selwyn?
Well, I never realised I had one, but maybe I have. The big problems and the big differences with what's happening here is, one, the telecommunications interception. What that does is it makes and insists that all ISPs provide de-encryption keys. And that's basically the key to the lock of everybody's private data. They don't want to do that. And they've got people like C.B. Woodhouse who started Orcon, sold it to the government for about $26 million. And now it has Voyager Internet. He is saying he doesn't want to do that, but he'll be forced to by these new laws. He's saying it's wrong. You've got Microsoft and Google saying that this new legislation puts them into a position where they have to choose. Do they obey New Zealand's law or do they obey US law that they're incompatible?
So this is, Rodney, this is anti-business legislation.
Well, all government legislation in a sense is anti-business legislation because all government legislation, all government actions are sort of a threat to our property rights and our freedom to act. But what we have an agreement with is the idea that we'll have a little bit of government. In my case, I'd like it to fit in my bathroom. But you have a little bit of government, and part of its job is to provide collective security. And it does diminish our freedom because it takes taxes to fund it, and it has some power to knock you around a bit if you misbehave. And in this case, they have some powers to, if they suspect someone who's a terrorist, to actually have a look at them. And to be honest, from my perspective, I say to myself, okay, that's a bit of a threat to me, but do I think on balance that's reasonable? Yes, because the threat to me is infinitesimal, that it could affect me in a negative way.
What about
the gain to me in terms of providing a bit better collective security is enormous.
But you're also very big on personal freedom, as we all are, and personal responsibility. So what happens then if this legislation and this surveillance technique was around in 1981 and used against, which it would have been, against the Springbok Tours, average Kiwi citizens, our radio listeners who got out there and marched against the Springbok Tour? It would have been
just
used.
Looking for your hat.
It would have been used against them, Rodney.
I'm just looking for your hat.
Haven't got a hat. Don't need it. Because I'm into personal freedom.
It would look. You have to understand what it takes to actually provide this sort of level of interception, and also too that the reason that you're interested in the metadata is if we have something go off, you actually want to be able to get on top of it pretty quickly, and that's why the metadata is important. In fact, Google has that metadata. God, they sell it. So I'm on a loser. I know I'm going to lose this.
Certainly when you count the numbers in the town hall.
I know that the Prime Minister can't win it, and I tell you why. It is the nature of covert surveillance that you can't point to the great wins, you can't point to its great success, and those people that want to run around and generate a scary story about how it's going to operate, it sounds reasonable. But the reality is, do you want to live in a world where a terrorist can hop on a plane, fly to New Zealand, and not actually be picked up?
Now you're scaremongering the nation.
I'll tell you what. That happened.
I'll tell you what some of the changes really are.
That happened under Helen Clark.
It's kind of surprising because where Rodney takes this, because these new pieces of law, they actually make the GCSB into a regulatory power. That goes along and it says, it'll say, Telecom, you cannot sell this product because we do not approve of it.
Yeah.
et cetera, et cetera. It puts the spies right in there with
But
the
that's
business
what the Greens
people.
were arguing for. The Greens were against Huawei coming in and actually providing it because it was, arguably a tool of the Chinese government.
No, the people who are objecting to that is the NSA in the United States, and certainly the House of Representatives in the United States, its Intelligence Committee, did a huge report in October 2010 excluding Huawei from being able to actually get access to government infrastructure.
And the Greens
because
stood up
we're
in
a
the
part of
New
it.
Zealand Parliament and complained that we should be doing the same.
And the other thing is the bill is just fundamentally, obviously wrong to the views of thousands of New Zealanders, so it is a loser and there are good reasons why
Alan
they
Clark
don't like
likes
it.
In terms of that, explain that, Selwyn, because this is surely cleaning up anomalies in the law. I mean, it existed under the Labour government as well, so surely this is cleaning up
It's not
irregularities.
cleaning up, it's making legal what was illegal. That's what it does. And that's the gross irony of this whole thing. New Zealanders always believed, the politicians always believed, that the GCSB was there to have an external view, to look at what was happening in the Western Pacific Basin. Now, what this does is it turns it, like we all know, onto New Zealanders. And they did that, John Key did that, because it was against the law what the GCSB
I want to ask one final question, and this is a question that Russell Norman asked in the House. Is the US in any way, do you think, funding or in part funding or enabling through funds this bureau?
Yeah, it is. And you can see it also that the documents that were leaked out of the cables between the US Embassy in Wellington and its mothership in Washington, D.C. show NSA staff being deployed inside the GCSB. It's a part of official record now. Also, the funds globally with the Five Eyes network, it is absolutely categorically stated that money is going to Britain, it is going to Australia, it goes to New Zealand, and it goes to Canada. It is a shared purse of funds.
All right, text us live to 3920. What do you think of these issues and other, or you can email me, radiolive.co.nz. It is 50 minutes away from 9 o'clock. We're with Rodney Hyde and Selwyn Manning. I just want to talk a bit about the snapper thing, because it too has been in the news. David Shearer lifts up what looks to me, Rodney, like a very undersized snapper, but apparently it isn't. It's the commercial size, 25 centimetres. Where do you stand on regulating the snapper catch for both commercial fishermen and recreational fishermen? I think you said before that you get bored by fishing. You don't like... you just don't have
I
the
had
patience.
to say it was the most astonishing thing I've ever seen, the idea that a politician would ever walk in with two dead fish and hold them up in the parliament, let alone the leader of the opposition. I mean, even when you do stunts like that, you think about how it'll look and, the downside, but actually the leader doesn't do it. They actually have everyone around them do it. But, David Shearer stood up there with two dead fish. I just can't imagine what he was thinking. Here's what it is. Clearly they think that snapper's being overfished, and we have a quota management scheme, and we have a recreational, fishing catch limit. And what will happen is politics will decide, the appropriate balance. The minister came out with the idea, which I'm sure looked reasonable on paper, that the cut should happen to the recreational fishers. That would have been ministry bureaucrats who don't have to get voted in to keep their job. The politicians are going to look at that and say, to hell with this, there's a lot of votes out there, and they're going to, take a hit to the commercial fishermen or keep the catch up. And John Key was very, very clever, because he made it all about the snapper, and then he can come along and fix it for the fishermen.
That's what it was, and it was trotted out at the time when they wanted a circuit breaker over the GCSB.
And then David Shearer fell for it.
Yeah, he fell for it.
There is this issue, I don't know if you guys are concerned or what, because it is big out there in Radioland in terms of the snapper thing. And in conservation land, I mean, you're a conservationist as well, in your heart of hearts, behind the personal freedom stuff there, Rodney. That snapper, actually, there's a reason apparently why there's lots of kinner in the sea. We're inundated by kinner. You know why? Because there ain't enough snapper. And it is actually an endangered fish. It's not truly endangered like orange ruffy, but there's not enough snapper in the sea, and that's a concern.
And you know who's noticed that first off?
Who?
the recreational fisher, but then secondly, the commercial fishers. And the commercial ones have been putting the squeeze on the National Party clearly to actually go in their favour, but it's coming back. And I think Rodney's right. The politics will determine it. John Key knows. He takes the line out really hard against the recreational, and then he's the one who actually delivers for them and brings it back so that they are more happy. You know, it's a political game.
And that's a good process. You know, that's how a process should work. You know, they've put out the policy from the bureaucrats, and I think Nathan Guy just sort of rubber stamped it, and then you get the feedback. You know, it's a consultation document, and they'll say to hell with us.
Well, Nathan Guy's in an interesting situation. He's one of the more weaker performing ministers in the national lead executive, and yet he's really being stretched on two major fronts here. One, the snapper, and on the other, you know, all of this about Fonterra.
Was he out of his depth in terms of both Snapper and Fonterra and Nathan Guy? We don't hear much about him, or we don't hear much from him, do we?
Watching him in the House, I think he is totally preoccupied and just trying to survive question time. That's the impressions he's getting. If that's the effect underneath when he's actually doing the job back in the beehive, then there's a problem there. You know, and really this is at the heart of National Party's key stakeholder areas. It's got to look after primary industries.
It's never a good look when you're a minister that basically the Prime Minister has to come in and fix it. And that's basically what's happened to Nathan Guy on, you know, a number of occasions. And that means that the minister loses their confidence, but more particularly all the ministry staff and political staff lose confidence in the minister, because they know that the Prime Minister's office is now keeping a close eye on you and will be asking for everything to be run past them. Didn't matter with Helen Clark, because her eye ran over everything anyway. So, you know, there's no particularly bad ministers. But John Key's got a more relaxed style, I think, with ministers. But Nathan Guy's office will be on serious watch.
Wow. It is 12 minutes away from 9 o'clock. We are back right after the break with Rodney Hyde and Selwyn Manning.
It's Wallace Chapman.
Lily says that David Shearer didn't have enough of the pit bull in him. You can email me, radiolive.co.nz. Go to the Sunday Show page and my email address is there. Always keen to hear from you. Nikki says here, perhaps the perception that the gay lobby taking over Labour will affect Robertson. You may be surprised that a lot of people don't agree with gay marriage, but labelled if voiced, which is what Rodney said. I want to talk briefly about Syria as well. Selwyn, you might be schooled up on this perhaps a bit more, but I was just stunned and shocked and dismayed to see these images on the TV about this supposed sarin gas and this gassing. But that's just the start of it. I'm amazed of the trauma that's happened in a once fairly peaceful part of the Middle East, Syria. What can we do? What do you think should the New Zealand government do?
Well, it's what can New Zealand do, really? But I suppose in the first
instance, least a response.
You could have Murray McCulley standing up and doing what Phil Goff has been trying to do for the last week and raise these types of things. What's happening there? Position New Zealand. We know that New Zealand, if it goes to a vote, it won't. You know, the Security Council will drive that, but New Zealand will come in behind it. At the moment, the United States has deployed from serious hardware into the Mediterranean, so it's within striking distance. The international community is rallying around to actually do something, but a United Nations multilateral response always is not satisfying the public mood that builds against a particular regime when this type of thing is going on.
Right.
And that's the problem. But if you get back to New Zealand can take a view where something has to be done when it is going wrong in the most extreme fashion, like it is in Syria. When you've got children gassed while they're asleep in their beds and are choking and dying, and others actually, you know, obviously their whole lives will be affected by this, then there's something seriously, sinisterly wrong with the regime there.
Rodney, I think it's part of being a global citizen, surely, that a government must take a stand when we see a country like this and such trauma, surely.
Well, you make a stand, but, you know, that doesn't mean much to these, you know, people and these tin pot dictators. And we've got to be very careful because, you know, it's like going into Iraq. You know, it can be popular at the start, but you can get yourself bogged down into a mess. And I think Helen Clark, in hindsight, I changed my mind. She was definitely right, you know, not to go into Iraq.
You changed your mind on that?
Yes. And
why?
I thought we could clean it up. you know, people were
Interesting.
being, and now, you know, you look at Syria and you think, actually, you know, what do? The UN can go in, or, you know, you can send forces in, but ultimately you'll get yourself bogged down. It's terrible, terrible situation. And you're living in this global village where a TV camera can capture the agony of a little kid in the night, wrapped up in his sleep, being killed by the authorities, gassing her. And you think how terrible this is, and then you feel this utter impotence.
Mm-hmm.
Because what can you do as a citizen? But more particularly, what can all the governments of the world do? Because all the governments in the world can pass resolutions, all the governments in the world can put sanctions on, all the governments of the world could actually invade. But then what do we do? And so this is this terrible situation, and I shake my head, to be honest, because, you know, I thought, oh, well, we'll get into Iraq, you know, that was once a great country, la-di-da-di-da, and, you know, he was a terrible dictator doing terrible things to his people. But, you know, on balance, was it a plus or a minus?
We've got 4 or 5 minutes left. I want to sort of round up really the hour about the Meridian flows. 60% up front with remaining 40% due in 18 months. So there you go. The asset sales are on and they are ready to rumble. Sarah Manning, are you going to be buying a portfolio of shares?
No, I won't. And if you look at Mighty River Power shares, I mean, it's been a big loser. And so the government's using taxpayer money to prop up and overinflate false values in this latest move to sell off the assets. I wouldn't go near it with a barge pole.
No? Not convinced? Rodney, what about you?
No, neither. And I think they have got themselves in a mess because, you know, to me, I'd just sell the whole lot and I wouldn't worry about what I got. I just get whatever the market says. But now they're doing this lay-by option. I think that's terrible personally because it's going to be encouraging unsophisticated people to invest in shares with money they actually haven't got. And so they're going to overinvest. And, you know, the reality is we haven't changed the performance of Mighty River because the government still owns the majority of it. And a privatiser like me who believes in the free market says, look, just get them out of the government's hands, get them on the market, but don't start sitting there selling a little bit and then trying to jack the market around to get the result that you want. I think it's typical National Party half-heartedness.
So you've changed your mind on Iraq, but you're still 100% believer in the power of the pure free market.
Yes, and funnily enough, all my friends who were free marketeers thought I was wrong about Iraq originally because they felt that, you know, we shouldn't be projecting that sort of force around the world. And I remember having, you know, privately vociferous arguments with them saying, you know, what do you do when you have a tin pot dictator who's doing this to people and violating, you know, all the rights that we favour, you know, rights to your life, to your happiness, to your property. And so, yes, I was wrong on that, but I certainly haven't changed my views on the importance of personal freedom, of living in a free society and actually using the market to provide for business rather than having government trying to run things. I mean, we laugh at how bad government is and yet we expect it to run everything.
There you go, Selwyn, a government the size of a bathroom. That's the quote of the
and then
quote of the hour.
It's a pretty